There we go. Okay,
Great.
with that, I'm going to hand over to you, Allison. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sarah. And hi, everybody. It's great to be here with all of you. And I'm so glad to see so many people interested in this really important topic. If you want to put up the first slide, Sarah. So as you heard, my name is Allison Branco. I work for the Nature Conservancy. I'm in New York. We do have folks working in Connecticut also. And what I want to talk to you about today as an introduction to talking about planning for relocation, or as some people like to call it, managed retreat, although we all know that that term is a bit loaded, and so we try to avoid it when we can. My team has put together what we call a flood adaptation hierarchy. And this is applicable for erosion too. And essentially, the point of it is to help communities, local governments, individual property owners understand and sort of think through the trade-offs in terms of what solution to the flooding problem they want to implement on their property. And I'll just say the QR code there in the bottom corner, and possibly we can put it in the chat also, is the link to the website, our Nature Conservancy website, where New York's climate adaptation work is described. And there you can find like a nice, not too technical, public friendly, pretty pictures version of what I'm going to describe today. And then at the end, I'll also give you a link to a published paper that is a lot more technical and has a lot of references to kind of back up these points. Next slide, please. So as we all know, I will call this the old way, although it's in many ways the current way still. When we have a natural process like flooding interacting with where people and our stuff is trying to be, that creates a problem. And a very typical process for addressing that has been this. First, we build something to defend ourselves. We build walls, we build revetments, we hire the engineers, and we put all kinds of structures up to protect ourselves. Only when that fails do we then try to accommodate all of this flood water. Here's an example of a house raised. Imagine what the septic system looks like. But this is a way that you can stay in that house and the water can come in and out. I will just say it's maybe a good solution if you only have occasional flooding, not so much when sea level rises. And then as a very last resort only, have we considered retreat or backing up and making way for water. And what I would argue, next slide, please, and what my team is trying to articulate in this paper that I mentioned is that that is backwards. We need to flip that paradigm exactly upside down. And really what we should be trying to do is first and foremost, protect the shorelines that are still natural and functioning the way they're supposed to. Only where it's too late for that should we back up and make way for water and get our stuff out of the floodplain. Only where that's not a possibility should we change our infrastructure to accommodate all the water. And only as a very last resort should we be defending ourselves against all of this water. It's a very big ocean. We're not stopping it. We just need to understand that. Next slide, please. So the reason that we think this is the order of operations here is that those things you see on the left, protecting the still natural floodplains and backing up and making way for water, is a much more permanent solution. It actually eliminates risk rather than just reducing part or some of the risk. And it allows nature to then adapt to the changes that are happening in the environment. As I think many of you know, our natural shorelines, this is true for rivers, oceans, sand dunes, it doesn't matter. They're very resilient and they can adapt to things like sea level rise if we're not in their way and we give them enough space to do so. And then the things on the right, accommodating and especially those defense activities, are much more temporary. They provide a false sense of security often because they have limits. They will protect you under very specific circumstances and only those circumstances. And if the environment exceeds those circumstances, then you're still in trouble. So what they do is they encourage a lot of investment in risky places because people have this false sense of security. And then, of course, as we all know, and you can see really well in this picture, there are a lot of impacts to nature, to the ecosystem, when you build walls like this. Next slide. So the other thing that we want to think about, as long as we're flipping the whole paradigm upside down, we also should rethink the fact that, you know, our old way of doing things has largely kind of ignored the people side of the equation. Not only has it ignored nature, but it's ignored people too. It's accounted for maybe that one property owner, but it hasn't really accounted for people on a large scale. So equity is a really important thing that I think everyone is finally waking up to understand we have to be incorporating into our projects and planning. So some of the things that we should be thinking about are the impacts. So who is benefiting or being harmed? So could be positive impacts, could be negative, but who's benefiting or who's being harmed? And are those impacts distributed equally across all populations? Next slide. Whose voices are in the decision-making process? Click one more, please. And so whose voices are in the decision-making process? It's really important. Engaging the community in planning or in providing input on projects is a hard thing to do. And it's often really not done well because of that. It's slow, it takes extra resources, but it's absolutely critical if we want to have an equitable town or local government or community. And then lastly, next, yeah, 2 clicks, please. Resources. So who's getting resources for projects like this and who's not? And does everybody have the same ability to access resources? This whole entire workshop is really about helping improve access to resources for all kinds of communities around Long Island Sound. So great job, Long Island Sound Study, for focusing on that. But as you all know, communities with more staff and more financial resources to write grant applications also are more likely to get grant applications. So oftentimes the rich get richer and the not so rich are not getting the resources that they need. Next slide. So that paper that I mentioned, here's the link, a DOI for it if you'd like that, and there's a QR code at the end too. And that's the title. And essentially it incorporates both a justification for this flipped paradigm, the hierarchy as we would call it, as well as a lot of information and kind of suggestions almost of questions you could be asking yourself to do a better job considering equity in that decision-making process. And what we would recommend is essentially you start on the left here with a natural buffer, and you stepwise go down, and you only go as far to the right as you absolutely have to. Because at the end of the day, when we zoom out across the landscape, what we want to have is a lot of natural shorelines and places where we've removed risk and repaired the shoreline and let it function naturally. And we want to reserve those hard solutions for where we only have them in a few places where they're absolutely necessary, because those are not doing a good job of balancing the needs of people and nature. Yeah, I think that's all I'm going to say about that for now. Next slide, please. So that QR code there will get you to that paper published in Ecology and Society. And I think, Sarah, I messaged you links to that correspond to both of these QR codes. If you could paste them in the chat, that would be super helpful for folks if they don't have their cell phone handy to look at the QR code. Also, my contact information is here as well. So if you are bought into this concept that we want to keep our shorelines natural wherever we can, allow them to adapt to changing climate, and try to really balance the needs of the people in the community with the needs of nature, then that means that planning to relocate and back up from the shoreline, especially in places where sea level is rising, is just going to be more and more and more important. And I still hear a lot of people say, oh, that's impossible here. We could never do that here. Nobody will ever do that here. And the only thing I can say to that is every community thought that at one time, and now some are starting to do it. It does happen. It happens all the time. It's by no means an easy thing to do. But I think that all of us living in and working with communities near the shoreline need to start really thinking seriously about longer term solutions that will actually reduce people's risk and protect our environment. Because at the end of the day, we do not want to build ourselves into a concrete bathtub, because nobody will want to live in Long Island Sound anymore. So with that, I will turn it over to Luke to talk to you about an example of a community that is starting to really do some retreating from the shorelines. So this is Luke Ormond. He is a senior environmental analyst with the town of Brookhaven in their division of land management. He's been working for the town for over a decade, most recently focused on habitat restoration, climate retreat, and land management. Graduate of Stony Brook University, also studied at LIS Southampton. And in addition to working for the town and doing a really great job, he also is a published wildlife photographer and a nature writer, and just a really interesting guy. But today he's going to talk to you about a place you likely have heard of because he's one of those sort of poster children for sea level rise, Mastic Beach.
Thank you, Allison. I really appreciate it. And Allison and the Nature Conservancy have been instrumental in assisting the town with this project. So again, this is the Mastic Beach, the strategic rewilding of our floodplain, exploring the town of Brookhaven's decade-long project. So the cover photo here is a bit arresting. You see the bay and what sort of was or is a road. The power line is in the water. And then there's a big house that's up on pilings. And what's interesting is that there actually was a house here during Sandy. It got destroyed and the owner decided to rebuild. And for various reasons, it has only advanced this far. But, you know, despite the fact that the bay is literally taking back the road, the owner thought that it was appropriate to build here. And that's something that, you know, the town is not crazy about for a variety of reasons. Next slide, please. So a little bit of context, we're talking about Mastic Beach, which is the white circled area in the town of Brookhaven, which spans from the Atlantic Ocean all the way up to the Long Island Sound. We are the largest town in the state of New York. We obviously have a significant land area, lots of water, lots of frontage. And it's a lot of resources that we put into what clearly is a very small area, but that just kind of goes to show how important this project is to us. Next, please. So the historical setting, Mastic Beach and the surrounding peninsula were once home to the Unkechaug Nation. In 1691, William Tangier Smith purchased large tracts of lands, including Mastic Beach, and he created a 55-acre Puspatuck Indian reservation. There's a little yellow dot marking the location, which is kind of northeast of Mastic Beach, but still on the water and kind of adjacent to some of these areas that we'll talk about. So much of the area that was purchased was marshland. A large upland tract was then purchased by William Floyd, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, where the William Floyd estate was established. Now it's part of the National Seashore, and it really bisects the two sections of Mastic Beach. And in the early 1900s, these marshlands and surrounding areas were filled in, converted to upland areas, sold as building lots, largely to city residents looking to build a summer cottage. So you had very dense development. Next, please. So some more recent history here. In August 2010, Mastic Beach actually incorporated itself into a village after residents felt the town was not doing enough for blue-collar village residents. In October of 2012, we had Superstorm Sandy that devastated the East Coast, really devastating Mastic Beach in particular. In 2015 and 2016, New York Rising buyout program started, and that ended up taking a lot of the really poorly damaged houses out of the picture, and sort of started the buyout end of this project. So in July 2016, there was a draft reevaluation report for Fire Island to Montauk Point plan, known as the FIMP plan. That was released by US ACE. So now here we are in 2022, and that's really starting to come to fruition. In November 2016, the village residents actually voted to dissolve the village due to political and fiscal problems. So then it was back fully in the hands of Brookhaven. In 2019 and 2020, the Brookhaven was awarded grants for ecological restoration projects. Next, please. So I'm going to show you this map, and then I'm going to show you an aerial for, again, some more visual context. So when we talk about Mastic Beach and the area that we are looking to do these buyouts in and preserving open space. It's pretty much as this map shows. And you can see the big pink section there. It's 611 acres. It's the William Floyd estate, which represents pretty much, the big chunk that was upland down here. Next slide, please. So here again is an aerial for some more visual context. You see the big chunk of natural woods, and you can see all those small black lines. Those are individual parcel lines. So this is very dense development, especially for Brookhaven Town, which is sort of a suburban, a little more country compared to areas like Nassau County. So we have a lot of properties and a lot of individual owners. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the floodplain, we talk about being in a flood zone and say, okay, well, these areas are vulnerable, but how vulnerable are they? We've all been in coastal areas and, okay, it's relatively flat, but how flat is it? I mean, I think these images really sort of drive home the point of how flat this area is. The average elevation, I think, is about 3 feet throughout our study area. You can see many houses are not raised still, many years later after Sandy. And there's actually a fishing pier in the larger image that when it was constructed, it was at the end of the road. And then erosion and sea level rise and things like that have eliminated much of that road. So we actually had to reconstruct a proper connection to that pier. Next slide, please. So, of course, what's the problem, right? Yes, you're in a flood zone. Yes, there's, some sea level rise, but again, how bad is bad? This is your sunny day flooding. So no storm event, no significant rainfall, no hurricane, no nor'easter. Maybe it was a full moon and the wind had piled up the water for a few days, but you can see the road and the bay are often indistinguishable. It's very difficult to get to people's homes without having to drive through massive puddles or rivers. Sometimes you have to turn around. And then, of course, this exacerbates other problems because if you have an old sanitary system, you're not flushing your toilets, you're not doing laundry, you're not taking a shower when the water is up this high. If you have to go to a doctor's appointment and you don't have a car that can get through this, you have a problem. So this is, in speaking to the old timers in the area, they'll say that it obviously was never like this and it's gotten so much worse. And clearly this is not sustainable from perspective of people that live there, from the perspective of the town, from the perspective of emergency managers. It's, something has to be done, and raising the roads doesn't really solve that problem. So the town, again, over the last decade, has utilized a number of acquisition programs. And we've done this with the county as well as with other groups such as the Nature Conservancy. So I'm just going to go through a couple of them and then I'll jump into some more details. Tax defaults. So the county will take title and cannot resell if it's located within the study area. I'll touch on that a little bit more later. But this is something that happens pretty often due to these properties having been in the same hands for decades or generations. Then we have acquisitions of structures and buyouts. So the town or county acquires lots with homes that are in various states. Some are livable, some are very much not so. We have acquisitions of vacant land, which is really a buyout program. So the town and county actively seek to acquire vacant wetland or undersized parcels for preservation. Then we have acquisition of vacant land that's done via donation. The town and county actively seek and accept donations of wetlands and undersized parcels for preservation. And then there's the FIM project, which is a federal project that is identifying specific properties that are going to be needed for some mitigation measures that they will be acquiring either voluntarily or through eminent domain. Next slide, please. So tax defaults. When an owner defaults on property taxes, the county takes the property and usually auctions that property back to the public. However, they also have the option to preserve or transfer the parcel to the township. So a deal was made between the town and the county that said, listen, this area is a flood zone. It's vulnerable. The town and the county have been acquiring lots of property. If there's a property that goes for a tax default, there's no reason that, you know, we should be selling it back to the public. It's undermining our program. And we certainly don't want people building new houses or reconstructing houses that were damaged. So they said, okay, we're not going to resell anything that's within this area, and it's going to automatically be preserved, which was a big hill to climb with the county, because that's certainly a way for them to get revenue when they can sell these properties, and certainly recoup some of the money that they lost from back taxes. So that was sort of a hit that they had to take financially, but they understood that it was really, you know, best for everybody involved. So the picture here shows a house, and then there's two properties on either side. So what happened with this was, there were three properties that were owned together. There was a mortgage on the house. The person defaulted on the mortgage. They stopped paying their taxes. The county was able to take the vacant lands back into their system and then gave them to the town. The bank refused to sell the house to the town and sold it to somebody else. So now we have the town has control of land on either side. And the unique situation about this is when they built the house, the setbacks were such that they have about a foot on either side of the house. So they literally cannot get from their front yard to their backyard. And as you can see in the sort of the lower right corner, there is a little wet area, you know, where this property is already reverting back to wetlands. Next. So the town buyout program with respect to houses, the town works with property owners to acquire distressed properties and remove structures. Some of these structures were damaged during Sandy and or are prone to significant flooding. Others have been vacant and languished over time, but are located within the floodplain. So the top picture there is a house that we actually are closing on, I believe, this month. This was damaged in Sandy. Somebody bought it sight unseen. They went out to it, and the town condemned it the next day, and they never got to get inside. It was a very tough financial decision for them to make, but unfortunately for them, they would have had to either raise the house or demolish it and start over. And fiscally, it just didn't make sense. And you can see, obviously, that the road is sort of standing water. There's a creek that's adjacent to it, so it's a very flood-prone area. The second house is actually not in an area that floods too often. It was not damaged during Sandy, but it was a distressed property it's in the flood zone. But the unique situation about this property is it's a very small bungalow that the property next door was taken down, and that's been preserved. But there's a house that's next to it that obviously you can't see in this image that did raise itself up and then did a sanitary system with a giant concrete wall. And the issue with that is that when the floodwaters do come, since your neighbor basically has a giant concrete wall around their property, it just pushes all the water onto this property. So this property owner realized that this was not really a good situation. The lot was very small, so even raising the house didn't make a lot of sense, and they have agreed to sell to the town. Next, please. So we also have a significant portion of this project is vacant land buyouts, and as well as accepting donations. So in buying vacant, undevelopable land, because it's encumbered with wetlands, it can be a difficult task for many reasons. Keeping track of acquisitions and owners is a crucial task. The following are some key components of this end of the town's project. We have mapping. Updated and accurate maps are required to keep track of progress, right? So if you don't have good maps, if you don't know what's coming and what's going, who owns what, it's very difficult to make any headway. Cold calling. This is something that I started a little over a year ago because I was kind of frustrated with the lack of progress that we were making. So I really just started putting the pieces together, finding phone numbers on the internet, and it's been extremely successful. And for some reason, no one has ever asked how I got their phone number, which I find unique. Establishing relationships, right? So we want to create a dialogue with these property owners and understand their stories. It goes a long way. A lot of these properties, again, these people have held on to for 10, 20, 50 years even. Sometimes even passed down from a grandparent to a parent and then to the grandchild. I had one property owner who was considering a buyout. He's a successful attorney down in Miami, certainly doesn't need the money. I explained to him that it's wetlands, and he said, well, I got it as a bar mitzvah gift, 50 some years ago, and it has a lot of meaning to me. So he still hasn't sold it to the town. I don't really know what his end game is, but there's a story behind every one of these properties, and understanding that story is important. And then to that end, networking. Many owners of these properties know one another, or maybe they know members of the community, or maybe they know people that you know. So taking any opportunity to network is invaluable. Again, just in this aerial, this small section here, there were a couple property owners that one in particular knew one of the council people and reached out and said, hey, I want to donate my property because I know what program you're doing down there. We had another person who's very involved in the community, and I had some contacts, and I was able to sort of start a rapport with that person, and they said, okay, you know what, this makes sense. And then proper research, understanding how to find details and contact information can make a big difference. You want to know, how long this person's owned the property, how much they paid for it, are their taxes up to date, is there a mortgage? The more information that you have, the better. Next, please. So we've identified the properties, we know what we want, we know how to get it, but how do we pay for it? So there's numerous funding sources. We've got town budget that has money built into it that comes out of the tax bill. We've got bonding that we put out for open space acquisitions. Then we have an environmental donation / fine / mitigation fund. So there's multiple sources that feed into that fund. So if someone illegally cuts down trees and we write them a ticket, sometimes the fine will be directed into that fund. Sometimes if someone's getting a change of zone from a light use, residential to a more intensive use like commercial or industrial, there's a mitigation fee that's associated with that based on the acreage. So that gets put into this fund. So we're able to use that money to pay for surveys and appraisals and closing costs and things like that. Then there's grants, which obviously are pretty self-explanatory, particularly given this course here that, all the different talks that people are having. There's lots of different sources. NIFWIF actually has been a source of funding that we've got, not for acquisition, but for doing some restoration down here. Then we've got not-for-profits and NGOs. Again, the town partnered successfully with the Nature Conservancy on a $1.2 million acquisition of over 100 lots from one individual owner down here. And then we've got some county and state joint acquisitions. Again, the county picks up stuff, they refer stuff to us, and vice versa. Next, please. So once we've acquired the lands, we've got the money, we paid for it, what kind of environmental liabilities and protections need to be considered? So we've got research history of the property, right? We want to look at government records, historic aerials, were there structures, was it farmed? Was there anything that kind of looks weird in the history of the property? Before we close on it, we usually will get phase 1 done. We'll get a phase 2 if warranted by that phase 1. And in almost all these cases, if we do find issues, if there's stuff that needs to be taken care of on the property, the landowner will be responsible for rectifying these issues prior to closing. So that goes into the photo that I've included here, which actually is sort of a different view of that previous one where I talked about we got the land and the bank took the house. We discovered one day when we went out there a smell of oil. So it turned out that the person that bought the house was flipping it. There was an oil tank that they decided the best way to get rid of it was to basically slice it open and drain it into the ground, which clearly is a no-no. So the property owner was then responsible for paying the costs through New York State DEC to remediate all of that stuff that happened on the town's land. Next, please. And then again, more managing these properties, right? So we've got, dozens or hundreds of lots in the floodplain. What kind of management issues are there? Well, unfortunately, illegal dumping is a big problem in this location. Your mileage will vary depending on a number of factors, the economics of the area, the access of the area and things like that. These are some 55 gallon drums of gasoline that were dumped on a property. A neighbor saw them and let us know that there was something that didn't look right. So we went out there. Fortunately, it wasn't a big spill, but we had to take care of that. And then this is another area of dumping that someone's been putting stuff on a road ending. So, you know, community eyes and ears are essential. Making those contacts out in the field who will then, you know, reach out to you as soon as they see something is paramount. Next, please. So we've got passive site restoration, right? So removing homes and ceasing maintenance is often all that's needed to allow for wetlands to self-heal. So here we've got on the left, this was a house. You can see there was some wetland vegetation kind of in the back and abutting the house. The house got taken down and look what happened. It turned into a cattail marsh. Usually it's just a simple act of the excavator compacting soil, lowering the grade a little bit, and then obviously, you know, ceasing the mowing that leads to this. Next, please. So here's more passive site restoration. There's a series of roadways in this area that were dirt, but they were very much still roads that people unfortunately got stuck on thanks to Google, or were used sort of for mudding and, you know, having some fun and things like that. So we've blocked off a lot of these sections, and you can see the difference here. As soon as you blocked it off, you know, the water stops getting splashed out of these ponds and puddles that formed. Cattails have moved in. There were actually fish in there. So again, this is pretty much not doing anything other than putting up a gate, and nature's healing itself. Next, please. And then we have active site restoration. So this is a project that some people that work at the town of Brookhaven in environmental protection have been focused on. Again, this was through a number of grants, through NIFWIF and some other sources to restore some habitat within vacant parcels, remove roadways, do some restoration of natural tidal channels and things like that. It's a multi-year vision, and the good thing is, despite the heavy cost, it looks like we're going to be able to roll this into a neat little package and hand it over for the FIMP project, and the federal government will be implementing a significant portion of this. Next, please. And then there's road removal. So a benefit of the acquisition project is gaining control over all lands that are fronting on sections of roadway. This permits the town to close, remove, or restore areas of roads. The benefits include habitat restoration, flood mitigation, hazard reduction, better land management, increased passive recreation, and reduced municipal maintenance costs. So again, here's a map of some roadways that we are hoping to rid ourselves of, probably turn them into a nature trail or bike trail. And then there's a image of an area that we blocked off with some gates. And so here's some numbers to close this out. We've got over 275 individual parcels preserved, more than 50 acres total land area. We've spent $1.6 million in acquisition money over the last decade. The project area is about 375 acres, so 60 homes have been torn down either by the town through the New York Rising program or by the individual property owners themselves. And we've currently got another 100 lots which are either in contract, have been appraised, or subject to a tax lien or some other process where we will be acquiring them. And then lastly, in the news, right? So our efforts have been highlighted through many programs, news outlets. We presented to groups from local civics to presentations geared at land management and climate scientists along the East Coast. Recently, the Washington Post published a lengthy article on 10 years after Sandy and they spent significant time with town officials understanding our projects and goals. This obviously is a big component. The more people that know about it, the more people are willing to sort of sign on, whether through selling their property or just understanding that this is the direction the town is going, and maybe it's the direction that their area needs to go in as well. And that's about it.
Thank you so much, Luke. Okay, so remember, you can put some questions in the chat and Sarah and I will sort of tag team getting them in the queue. And let's start with this question. Someone said they were curious how many staff the town of Brookhaven has working on various parts of this project, because it's really impressive what you've been able to do, and it seems like it would require a lot of dedicated staff.
Yeah, so the answer, short answer is one. The long answer is many. I'm the sole land manager for the town of Brookhaven, but I do have two excellent part-time consultants that are well-versed in acquisition. So they really handle sort of the appraisal and the back-end stuff. But I'm the one who's making most of the phone calls and taking these people information and things like that. But it's really through the support of the town board, because they have to sign off on all of these. Our town attorney is in charge of our open space program, and without her vision and the vision of the board, this would never happen, and they would never let me spend an inordinate amount of time in Mastic Beach.
Okay. Next one. Does the town of Brookhaven have any management to prevent encroachment of invasive species, for example, Phragmites, on acquired properties that are left to revert back to wetlands?
So this is an area that would fall under land management, where we don't really do what we should, or what we can, what we need to. Unfortunately, again, due to staffing issues, it's really sort of Band-Aids when we can find them. So there's been some properties down here where bamboo has come up or encroached from other neighboring properties. So we're starting to tackle that. Fortunately, most of the stuff that reverts does revert pretty well. Phragmites is certainly an issue. However, from a flood management perspective, Phragmites actually is a good friend to have, because it grows so dense and so thick. So when you talk about, okay, we need to slow down water, we need to slow down debris and things like that, Phragmites is not the worst invasive species. But once this project is done, so to speak, with respect to acquisitions, and we've got 95% of the stuff, we'll then be able to focus on that. And then, of course, this FIM project is like 130 acres, which is designed to do some real good restoration.
Great, thank you. Another one, I'm going to include the comment with the question because I think a lot of us are agreeing. This looks like an excellent program under difficult circumstances. So the question is it well received by the community, or are you perceived, or do you feel like the Grim Reaper of properties?
So that's an excellent question, and it's something that every community is probably going to struggle with in dealing with these types of programs. The people that live in Mastic Beach are a unique bunch, which Allison can back me up on that. There's I can't tell you how many different organizations and groups. They all have a common goal, but they also have their own kind of pet projects. And over the years, it's gotten much easier. Originally, it was very difficult. But as they saw, more properties get, knocked down or converted, and as they saw, their roads continuing to flood, we're pretty much in two camps now. Those that know that this is a problem, but they're going to stay, and those that know that this is a problem and that they are probably going to leave. But that being said, we do have people that are still, moving into the community. I have a friend that I've known for many years, and she calls me up one day and starts asking these, questions about, Mastic Beach and this and that. And I said, well, what are you asking me? She says, oh, I bought 2 houses. I said, you bought 2 houses? She says, yes, well, one's raised and the other one's not. So, I asked her why, and she said, it's, it's so beautiful and the views are unbelievable. And so you're always going to have people that are attracted to that area. And as long as they understand the risks, that's something that can be managed. But overall, the perception of the town has been very good.
Yeah, I'll add too, because I've seen this happen. I think, as silly as it sounds, I think, making a concerted effort in terms of public education over the long term, I have really seen a change result from that. The town board, Luke, and the others in the environmental department, and they've brought in partners also. There's been a real concerted effort to get people to understand the value of wetlands, what the pros and cons are of all the different things that could be happening down here. And I think over time, you've really started to see a change in some of the folks that at one time didn't want any of this to happen and wanted a big wall built around them. They're really starting to change their tune. So don't underestimate the value of a little public education, but it's, it takes time, but it's worth it.
I mean, I wasn't really a believer when I first started.
There you
Some of
go.
my coworkers would
Perfect.
talk about buying these wetlands, and I'm like, I don't really get this because you can't do anything with it anyways. But what we saw actually with Mastic Beach, when it became a village, is now they were able to make up their own rules, and we didn't have control over that, and that was a scary prospect. Fortunately, we got out of it pretty well unscathed, but the DEC's jurisdiction didn't extend over a lot of these properties for various reasons. So the photo at the introduction of my slide with that giant sort of box next to the wetlands there, that was the last house that was approved by the village before they dissolved. If that property had gone to the town, there's almost no way that the town would have ever approved it. So once we started putting together the pieces, it does make sense. I mean, it's like looking at a 10,000 piece jigsaw puzzle, right? If you've got the border and you say, this looks like it's difficult, but once you start filling things in, you say, you know what, maybe this can happen, and it's not so daunting of a task.
I'm going to combine a couple different questions that are sort of about the messages that work with the community. So Superstorm Sandy is really viewed in terms of devastation to human infrastructure, but it really provided a badly needed refresh and improvement of nature's infrastructure. Is that a message that resonates with the public? And then similarly, is there one or a few messages that you think really resonated with the public in terms of helping them understand the benefits of this project?
Yeah, so I think Sandy was a huge wake up for a lot of people, especially in Mastic Beach. Yes, their area was devastated, but they were sort of used to flooding and things like that. But I think when they saw that they were kind of the spotlight up and down the East Coast, right, that they got hit. Mastic Beach and the Rockaways really on Long Island were the two areas that got hit the most. I think that was a big wake up call. And in speaking with the residents down there, people that were formerly the mayor of Mastic Beach Village or sat on the various boards or committees or things like that, I think they had to take a step back and say, well, why do I live here and what do I like about living here? Because it's as far as convenient, it's not a convenient place to live because there's a lot of traffic. It's very difficult to get up to the main highways. So you have to be sort of dedicated to the area. And I think that they realize that, they love nature. They love seeing the bay. They love seeing the birds. They love being able to go for a walk and having all of that. And they realize that, what, the town and the county and whoever else doing this project is really going to enhance pretty much all of those things and really not take away anything other than, blighted properties. Again, this is a voluntary program. I say to everyone when I say, listen, we're going to do an appraisal and we're going to make you an offer. And I tell them no hard feelings. If you say no, you say no. And, we'll be here to listen to you if you change your mind.
Here's a good one for some of the students that might be listening. What is your educational background that enabled you to perform this role and work on this project?
So I actually grew up, ironically, in Minnesota, far away from coastal flooding. I was originally born in New York and moved there when I was 4. I couldn't wait to come back. So I started at Long Island University, Southampton, which then unfortunately went under. I transferred over to Stony Brook. I was originally seeking to do some marine biology stuff, but Stony Brook is very hard and the math classes are very hard. And I literally went through the book of majors and said, okay, what can I do where I don't have to take calculus? And I came across environmental studies. And I had some contacts that got me some really good summer jobs and started working at Southampton Town right out of college. I was there for 1.5 years before I made the jump here to Brookhaven. And then it's something that kind of snowballed over the years where I was doing, wetlands permits and environmental review on things, but I wasn't finding that I was passionate about it. And then I was sort of helping out the land management people as much as I could and somewhat forcefully inserted myself into their division, and the rest is history.
I love that. Okay, so another 2 questions. Has there been significant tax revenue lost from these reclaimed properties? And what is the town's plan for recouping some of the lost revenue?
So good news, bad news. The town of Brookhaven is very big. So that means we've got a lot of people to draw on with respect to taxes. So it doesn't really impact it terribly. Again, that even with the school district that this is in, it's in the William Floyd School District, which is one of the largest on the island. So again, there's a ton of tax revenue that's going into that district anyway. So there certainly is a hit. I wouldn't dare crunch the numbers so that people who don't like those things would ever see those numbers. But really, again, this is, coming from the support of the board and the community. They understand that, yes, there's loss in tax revenue, but there's also reduced costs, right? We don't have to maintain some of these roadways. We don't have to deal with, fixing problems that keep coming up. We don't have to try to engineer solutions with respect to drainage or raising roads or things like that. So everything has a cost benefit analysis, and so far no one's really been too disturbed on the loss of tax revenue.
I'll maybe just add really quickly. A few years back, my team did a little exercise using some data the Union of Concerned Scientists published to look at the percentage of each town's tax revenue that was actually vulnerable to sea level rise. And although it is a thing you hear a lot of, concern about, for the majority of municipalities in the state of New York, it is a single-digit percentage, and usually, like 1, 2, 3, or even fractions of a percent. So just something to put all of that concern in perspective a little bit. Maybe I'll answer this one actually. Are there remaining funds available through the New York Rising buyout program? Is the program still active? So the answer to that is no, not exactly. So the post-Sandy buyout program has ended. They're still working, but there's no new buyouts are happening. But the good news is, with the passage of the New York State Clean Air and Clean Water Green Jobs Bond Act, there is new money being allocated by the state for buyouts. Still remains to be seen exactly how that will be rolled out, but it will go. A lot of the folks that were working in the New York Rising program got moved into the Department of Homes and Community Renewal, and they are likely to be administering this new round of buyouts from the state. Also, anytime there's a disaster, there are new opportunities to get funding from FEMA for buyouts. And in theory, FEMA's BRIC program, which stands for Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, could also fund buyouts at any point, because that's really a much more sort of proactive kind of not disaster tied program. Okay, let's see. How does the town interact with the Army Corps of Engineers? This person's recollection is that before Sandy, there was significant investment in restoring West Hampton Beach from ocean erosion.
So US ACE, again, is doing this FIMP project, the Fire Island to Montauk Point project, which is largely ocean beach focused, though a big sort of component to it is raising houses, right? So there's a voluntary house raising program. They'll pay for it if your house meets certain criteria. You got to find a place to live otherwise, but uniquely in Mastic Beach, they're doing several habitat restoration projects. So I talked about the town having a plan that we're basically going to tie up and give to US ACE for them to implement. Our relationship with them has been wonderful, though as can be expected when working with a federal agency, their answers are often slow to come and have to go through several people to get you an answer, right? If you've got a question for the town, you call me and I give you an answer. If you got a question for ACE, it may take a while. But we just had a community meeting actually, because Mastic Beach is going to be a pilot area for the house raisings. So they're looking to get a certain number of people to agree to this program so they can kind of test it out and work out any kinks. So they've, again, have been a great partner in this.
And I'll maybe just add that within the FIMP project, what's happening in Mastic Beach is pretty rare. So there is a lot of beach nourishment and sand moving around as part of that project, and a lot of home raising. And like, is it 14, Luke, actual acquisitions that are going to happen in the entire South Shore of Long Island in Mastic Beach?
Yeah, so I mean, that was the original number, but then it turned out that by the time they presented it to us, we'd acquired a whole bunch of them. So now we're down to like 3 or 4. One we're trying to take down. One is that box house where I think the property owner kind of knows that's the end game. And then there's one other sort of seasonal cottage, and the owners are receptive.
So yeah, still lots of sand moving, but if you're doing good work and you can show it to them, they are willing to do great stuff like this. Okay, this is, I think, our last one. Referring back to what I said about preserving those natural buffers in the hierarchy, are buffer ordinances being revised or expanded to be more protective in Brookhaven? It looks pretty intensely developed in this area, so it may not be an option.
Yeah, so it essentially is not an option. Again, the good news is there's very little vacant land that's undeveloped that can be developed in this area. So we're not seeing a lot of new construction. We certainly have seen reconstruction, and we've seen some lots that have been vacant for a few years, and they've redeveloped. The issue with those is that by and large they're going to be up on pilings. And the lots are just so small that there's really not much you can do. But, there was a property owner that they were having an issue with a covenanted buffer, and they happened to own an adjacent piece that was wetland. So we made a deal that they donated that to us. And then we're able to sort of, deal with that other issue. There's always creative solutions. And again, we've had people that have been very receptive to us making them a real dollar offer to sort of, because as beautiful as it is, it's still difficult to live on a lot that's 50 by 100 when your road floods. So, again, we're not seeing a lot of new development, fortunately.
Okay, I'm going to give just one last call because we're almost to the end. We might have one more minute for one more question if there is anything. Okay, I think not. I turn it back to you, Sarah.
All right, well, thank you, Allison and Luke. Thank you so much. That was really great. I really appreciated both of your presentations, and I've seen some comments in the chat to that effect as well. Really great presentations from both of you. I know I learned a lot. So thank you so much. We have about probably 45 seconds before I close these breakout rooms, and we're all going to go back. So just everyone, so we know, and to reiterate, once we go back into the main room, we are going to take a quick stretch break one more time. And when we come back, we will have one more round of concurrent breakout rooms. So definitely, I know I'm going to take a quick break and then we'll be back at it. And so I'm going to go ahead and hit the button to close these rooms, and we'll see everybody back at 3:20 in that main room where we give instructions before we break out into the next session. So again, thank you so much, Allison and Luke. It was really fantastic.